Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 1. We're talking about the things that life has to do to stay alive. We talked about things that life has to have, or rather that an organism has to have to be considered alive. All living things have to adapt to their environment. We were just talking about the fact that only the individuals that survive today can have babies tomorrow. And because they survive today, it means they had traits that allowed them to survive today. And because of that, we hope that those traits then are genetic and can be passed on to the kids. And if you allow this to continue over many centuries, over many millennia, over thousands of generations, these beneficial traits, these things that allow a population to do well in this environment, should build up within that population. So as we look here, this is all the stuff that we just talked about. I'm not sure if you can see. I hope you've downloaded the presentations. I strongly encourage you to look at that presentation while you listen to the video so you can see better, and also take notes while you are watching the videos. This is a sunflower, and you can clearly see on the picture, you can clearly see how the seeds are highly ordered. They're not randomly spread throughout the head of the sunflower. They are in very precise locations. That means order. That means precise math. All living things have order. All species must reproduce to stay on the planet, to stay alive. We see mommy elephant, baby elephant. Everything that's alive has to grow and develop. Here's an alligator being born, brand new, emerging from its shell. It is a tiny little thing. It's going to take it a long time to grow to be a large alligator like what we see on swamp people. Everything that's alive must process energy. Plants absorb sunlight and use that sun to make sugar, which they then eat for energy. Plants are then eaten by animals, and the animals steal that sugar that the plants made to power their own bodies. Everything that's alive must process energy. It consumes energy from one source and uses that energy to build its own body, to reproduce, to fight disorder, to grow and to develop. All living things must regulate. We see a lizard sitting on a rock. Why is the lizard sitting on the rock? The lizard is sitting on the rock because it is sunning itself. It is warming up. It is regulating its body temperature. Your body temperature is regulated internally. They must regulate their body temperature externally. Your body does it for you. You don't have to worry about it. They do have to worry about it. They have to decide when it's time to go warm up and when it's time to cool off. Everything that's alive must respond to its environment. This is a Venus flytrap that has eaten a dragonfly. A plant immediately responds to its environment, meaning the dragonfly landed on the flytrap and the Venus flytrap responded to the dragonfly by clamping shut, responding to the environment. We don't really think about plants being able to respond to their environment, but they absolutely do. And last is everything that's alive must adapt to its environment. We see a snowy owl. Why is it called a snowy owl? Because it is white and it's found in the far north where it is cold. Why is this owl white? Because it allows it to better blend in to its environment. Everything that's alive has to have those properties that we just discussed. Everything that's alive, as we already said, is organized. That's the first thing that we talked about. Life requires order. Well, let's talk about this organization. Let's talk about how life is ordered. We take it down to the smallest division of order, and the smallest division of order in living things is the molecular level, and that is that atoms bind together to make these things that we call molecules. I take those molecules, those atoms that I've bound together, and I put a bunch of those things together. I put a bunch of molecules together. I put a bunch of molecules together, and I get these things called organelles. When we look at the word called organelle, what's an organ? What are some of your organs? Organs like your heart, organs like your stomach, organs like your liver. An organ is an internal structure. Well, your skin is also an organ, so it can be external. But an organ is a structure that has a job that it performs for your body that nothing else does. Nothing else pumps blood for you. If you don't have a heart, you're not going to live. Your lungs, nothing else brings oxygen into your body. If you don't have lungs, you're not going to live. Your liver does a whole bunch of stuff. Your liver breaks down toxins. If you don't have a way of breaking down toxins, you're not going to live. Every organ you have in your body does a job that no other organ does, and you can't live without any of them. So organ, a structure that has a particular function. L, E-L-L-E. L is one of the 1,000 suffixes that means little, small, tiny. So organelle literally means little organ. I'll take a break for just a second. This is one skill that I hope if you learn anything from me, is you learn the ability to break down words, to look at the different pieces of a word and to figure out what it means, and it helps you to learn. We'll talk more about this, and we'll do this in pretty much every chapter. There will be words that I will break apart and help you to understand the meanings. So an organelle is a little organ. It's a little organ inside of a cell. Cells have little organs. Well, they don't have hearts and they don't have stomachs, but they do have things that process energy for them. They do have things that make molecules that they need. They do have structures that break down products, like your stomach breaks down products. So organelles, little structures that perform functions within a cell. So remember, I take atoms and I put those together and I get molecules. I take molecules and I put them together and I get organelles. I take organelles and I put them together and I get cells. What are some of the organelles that you know? Like the nucleus, like the mitochondria, is the powerhouse of the cell. Like the rough ER, like the smooth ER, the Golgi, all of these organelles have jobs they perform. I take all of the organelles and I put them together and I make this thing called a cell. A cell is the smallest living thing. It's the smallest thing that can be considered alive. It's not the smallest thing. We just talked about a bunch of stuff that's smaller. You know, the nucleus is inside of a cell, so it has to be smaller. And organelles are smaller, molecules are smaller, but they're not alive. I have to put them all together, and then once I've done that, once I've put them all together and they're functioning together, now we have this thing called a cell. Now we have this magical, mystical property that we call life. I take molecules and I put them together, I get organelles. I put organelles together and I get cells. I put cells together and I get tissues. Tissues are a bunch of cells working together doing the same jobs. Mushrooms. Fungi have their specific kind of tissues. Plants have their specific kind of tissues. Animals, I'm an animal guy, so we're going to talk about animal tissues. Animals have their specific tissues. Epithelial tissue covers body surfaces. So where's a good place to find some epithelial tissue? This stuff right here, this is epithelial tissue. Connective tissue supports an animal's body. So what are some connective tissues? What kinds of things, what tissues hold a body up? Like your bones, like your tendons, like your ligaments. Those are connective tissues. Muscle tissue moves the body. So when you think of like your biceps, your triceps, your lats, your quads, your glutes, those are your muscles. And there's lots of different kinds of muscles. We'll talk about those when we get there. And then nervous tissue. Nervous tissue communicates and controls. Nervous tissue, think of nerves. What do your nerves do? Your nerves are basically communication lines or phone lines between your brain and your body. It's what your brain uses to operate your body, and it's what your body uses to send messages back to the brain to tell the brain how the body's doing. So nervous tissue, communication and control. We have a bunch of cells that are nervous tissue cells. We have a bunch of different cells that are muscle cells. We have a bunch of different cells that are connective tissue cells. We have a bunch of different cells that are epithelial tissue cells. A bunch of cells working together are called a tissue. I take a bunch of tissues and I put them together and I get this thing called an organ. And we already talked about some organs, like the heart. The heart is made of all 4 tissue types. Well, it's a muscle because it moves stuff, so that's 1. The heart can speed up and slow down, which means it has to have nerves attached to it. So that's nervous tissue, that's 2. Anytime you have muscle, there's always connective tissue associated with it. You've probably heard of something tugging on your heartstrings. You literally have strings in your heart that literally tie some things down. This is a much longer conversation we're not going to get into. But those strings are made of a connective tissue. That's 3. And last is epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue covers body surfaces, like the surface of your heart. It also lines internal organs. An internal organ it lines hollow organs. A hollow organ like your heart. So your heart is covered in epithelial tissue and it is lined in epithelial tissue. Your heart, it's made of all 4 tissue types. And it's not unusual that it is made of all 4 tissue types. Most of your organs are made of all 4 tissue types.